hello, hi, hello. Just a few things, and then I will get to the reading of the book. First, the first part, I do go to a different trail. It doesn't look like it because all the trails around here, except for the one place way up mountains, whatever, it all looks the same because it's nothing but pine trees everywhere, but it is different. It was super windy and super crowded, lots of people. So I only did a little bit of suiting there because it was difficult to suit there. And then the rest of it, on a different day, I go back home to the woods directly around where I live, the usual woods that you've seen 10 million bajillion times. I just got my second COVID vaccination today. Yay! And my arm hurts, but that's it so far. But I've heard both ends of the spectrum. My mom really didn't get sick at all, but my fiance, on the other hand, he just was horribly sick for a long time. So we'll see which way it happens for me. So in other words, this may be my last posting for a little while, depending on how my body decides to react to the vaccination. I think where we left off last time, the time before last time, she listened to the baseball game and she fell asleep first night, and the last time I read, I think she woke up after her first night and she had the crazy nightmare about her dad and the wasps and such. I don't remember quite exactly. You can always go to the playlist and breeze through the last video to get an idea where we were last. Okay, I do believe that's it. Let's get on with the show. Continuation of bottom of the fourth. She dipped her cupped hands into the water and washed her face. She didn't drink any, vaguely remembering someone saying that woods water could make you sick. But the feel of it on her hot and lumpy skin was wonderful, like cold satin. She dipped up more, wetting her neck and soaking her arms to the elbow. Then she scooped up mud and began to apply it. Not just on the bites this time, but all over, from the round collar of her 36 Gordon shirt right up to the roots of her hair. As she did it, she thought of an I Love Lucy episode she'd seen on Nick at Night. Lucy and Ethel at the beauty parlor, both of them wearing these funky 1958 mud packs. And Desi had come in and looked from one woman to the other, and he had said, "Hey, Lucy, which one are you?" Oh my God, I can't talk like him. Sorry. And the audience had howled. She probably looked like that, but Trisha didn't care. There was no audience out here. No laugh track either, and she couldn't stand to be bitten anymore. It would drive her crazy if she was. She applied mud for 5 minutes, finishing with a couple of careful dabs to the eyelids, then bent over to look at her reflection. What she saw in the relatively still water by the bank was a minstrel show mud girl by moonlight. Her face was a pasty gray, like a face on a vase pulled out of some archaeological dig. Above it, her hair stood up in a filthy spout. Her eyes were white and wet and frightened. She didn't look funny, like Lucy and Ethel getting their beauty treatments. She looked dead. Dead and badly embarned, or whatever they called it. Speaking to the face in the water, Trisha intoned, "Then," Little Black Sambo said, "Please, tigers, do not take my fine new clothes." But that wasn't funny either. She smeared mud up her lumpy, itchy arms, then lowered her hands toward the water, meaning to wash them off. But that was stupid. The gosh damn old bugs would just bite her there. The pins and needles had mostly worked out of her arm and leg. Trisha was able to squat and pee without falling over. She was also able to stand up and walk, although she grimaced with pain each time she moved her head more than a little to the right or left. She supposed she had a kind of whiplash injury, like the one Mrs. Chetwynd from up the block had gotten when some old man had rammed her car from behind as she waited for a traffic light to change. The old man hadn't been hurt a bit, but poor Mrs. Chetwynd had been in a neck brace for 6 weeks. Maybe they would put her in a neck brace when she got out of this. Maybe they would take her to a hospital in a helicopter with a red cross on the belly like a MASH and... Forget it, Trisha, it was the scary cold voice. No neck brace for you. No helicopter ride either. Shut up, she muttered, but the voice wouldn't. You won't even get embarned because they're never going to find you. You'll die out here, just wander around in these woods until you die, and the animals will come and eat your rotting body, and someday some hunter will come along and find your bones. There's something so terribly plausible about this last. She had heard similar stories on the TV news, not just once, but several times, it seemed, that she began to cry again. She could actually see the hunter, a man in a bright red woolen jacket and an orange cap, a man who needed a shave, looking for a place to lie up and wait for a deer, or maybe just wanting to take a leak. He sees something white and thinks at first, just a stone, but as he gets closer, he sees that the stone has eye sockets. Stop it, she whispered, walking back to the fallen tree and the wrinkled spread remains of the poncho under it. She hated the poncho now. She didn't know why, but it seemed to symbolize everything that had gone wrong. Stop it, please. The cold voice would not. The cold voice had one more thing to say. One more thing, at least. Or maybe you won't just die. Maybe the thing out there will kill you and eat you. Trisha stopped by the fallen tree. One hand reached out and grasped the dead jut of a small branch, and looked around nervously. From the moment of waking, all she'd really been able to think about was how badly she itched. The mud had now soothed the worst of the itching, and the residual throbbed with the wasp stings, and she again realized where she was. In the woods, alone, and at night. At least there's a moon, she said, standing by the tree and looking nervously around her little crescent of clearing. It looked even smaller now, as if the trees and underbrush had crept in closer while she was sleeping. Crept in slyly. The moonlight wasn't as good a thing as she'd thought, either. It was bright in the clearing, true, but it was a deceptive brightness that made everything look simultaneously too real and not real at all. Shadows were too black. When a breeze stirred the trees, the shadows changed in a disquieting way. Something twittered in the woods, seemed to choke, twittered again, and was silent. An owl hooted far off. Closer to, a branch snapped. What was that? Trisha thought. Turning toward the snapping sound, her heartbeat began to ramp up from a walk to a jog to a run. In another few seconds it would be sprinting, and then she might be sprinting as well, panicked all over again and running like a deer in front of a forest fire. Nothing. It was nothing, she said. Her voice was low and rapid, very much her mother's voice, although she did not know this. Nor did she know that in a motel room 30 miles from where Trisha stood by the fallen tree, her mother had sat up out of a troubled sleep, still half dreaming with her eyes open, sure that something awful had happened to her lost daughter, or was about to happen. It's the thing you hear, Trisha, said the cold voice. Its tone was sad on top, unspeakably gleeful underneath. It's coming for you. It's got your scent. There is no thing, Trisha said in a desperate, whispery voice that broke into complete silence each time it wavered upward. Come on, give me a break. There's no thing. The unreliable moonlight had changed the shapes of the trees, had turned them into bone faces with black eyes. The sound of 2 branches rubbing together became the clotted croon of a monster. Trisha turned in a clumsy circle, trying to look everywhere at once, her eyes rolling in her muddy face. It's a special thing, Trisha. The thing that waits for the lost ones. It lets them wander until they're good and scared. because fear makes them taste better. It sweetens the flesh, and then it comes for them. You'll see it. It'll come out of the trees any minute now. A matter of seconds, really. And when you see its face, you'll go insane. If there was anyone to hear you, they'd think you were screaming. But you'll be laughing, won't you? Because that's what insane people do when their lives are ending. They laugh, and they laugh, and they laugh. Stop it! There is no thing! There is no thing in the woods! You stop it! She whispered this very fast, and the hand holding the nub of the dead branch clutched it tighter and tighter until it broke with a loud report like a starter's gun. The sound made her jump and utter a little scream, but it also steadied her. She knew what it was, after all, just a branch, and one she had broken. She could still break branches. She still had that much control over the world. Sounds were just sounds. Shadows were just shadows. She could be afraid. She could listen to that stupid traitor of a voice if she wanted to. But there was no thing, special thing, in the woods. There was wildlife, and there was undoubtedly a spot of the old kill or be killed going on out there at this very second, but there was no There is. And there was. Now, stopping all of her thoughts and holding her breath without realizing it, Trisha knew with a simple, cold certainty that there was. There was something. Inside her there were at that moment no voices, only a part of her she didn't understand. A special set of eclipsed nerves that perhaps slept in the world of houses and phones and electric lights and came fully alive only out here in the woods. That part didn't see and couldn't think, but it could feel. Now it felt something in the woods. "Hello?" she called toward the moonlight and bone faces of the trees. "Hello? Is someone there?" In the Castle View motel room Quilla had asked him to share with her, Larry McFarland sat in his pajamas on the edge of one of the twin beds with his arm around his ex-wife's shoulders. Although she wore only the thinnest of cotton nightgowns, and he was pretty sure she had nothing on beneath it. And further, although he had not had a sexual relationship with anything but his own left hand in well over a year, he felt no lust. No immediate lust, anyway. She was trembling all over. It felt to him as though every muscle in her back were turned inside out. "It's nothing," he said, "just a dream." "A nightmare you woke up with and turned into this feeling." "No," Quilla said, shaking her head so violently that her hair whipped lightly against his cheek. "She's in danger! I feel it! Terrible danger!" And she began to cry. Trisha did not cry, not then. At that moment she was too scared to cry. Something was watching her. Something. "Hello?" she tried again. No response, but it was there, and it was on the move now, just beyond the trees at the back of the clearing, moving from left to right. And as her eyes shifted, following nothing but moonlight and a feeling, she heard a branch crack where she was looking. There was a soft exhalation. Or was there? Was that perhaps only a stir of wind? "You know better," the cold voice whispered. And of course she did. "Don't hurt me," Trisha said, and now the tears came. "Whatever you are, please don't hurt me. I won't try to hurt you. Please don't hurt me. I'm just a kid." The strength ran out of her legs, and Trisha did not so much fall down as fold up. Still crying and shivering all over with terror, she burrowed back under the fallen tree like the small and defenseless animal that she had become. She continued begging not to be hurt almost without realizing it. She grabbed her pack and pulled it in front of her face like a shield. Big, shuddery spasms racked her body, and when another branch cracked closer, she screamed. It wasn't in the clearing, not yet, but almost. Almost. Was it in the trees, moving through the interlaced branches of the trees? Something with wings, like a bat? She peered out between the top of the pack and the curve of the sheltering tree. She saw only tangled branches against the moon-bright sky. There was no creature among them, at least not that her eyes could pick out. But now the woods had fallen completely silent. No birds called, no bugs hummed in the grass. It was very close, whatever it was, and it was deciding. Either it would come and tear her apart, or it would move on. It wasn't a joke, and it wasn't a dream. It was death and madness, standing or crouching or perhaps perching just beyond the edge of the clearing. It was deciding whether to take her now or to let her ripen a little while longer. Trisha lay clutching the pack and holding her breath. After an eternity, another branch cracked, this one a little further off. Whatever it was moving away. Trisha closed her eyes. Tears slipped out from beneath her mud-caked lids and ran down her equally muddy cheeks. The corners of her mouth quivered up and down. She wished briefly that she was dead. Better to be dead than have to endure such fear. Better to be dead than to be lost. Further off, another branch cracked. Leaves shook in a brief, windless gust, and that was further off still. It was going, but it knew she was here now, in its woods. It would be back. Meanwhile, the night stretched out ahead of her like 1,000 miles of empty road. I'll never get to sleep. Never. Her mother told her to pretend something when Trisha couldn't sleep. Imagine something nice. That's the best thing you can do when the Sandman's late, Trisha. Imagine that she was saved? No, that would only make her feel worse, like imagining a big glass of water when you were thirsty. She was thirsty, she realized. Dry as a bone. She guessed that was what got left over when the worst of your fear departed, that thirst. She turned her pack around with some effort and worked the buckles loose. It would have been easier if she had been sitting up, but there was no way in the world she was coming out from under this tree again tonight. No way in the universe. Unless it comes back, the cold voice said. Unless it comes back and drags you out. She grabbed her bottle of water, had several big gulps, recapped it, restowed it. With that done, she looked longingly at the zippered pocket with her Walkman inside. She badly wanted to take it out and listen for a little while, but she should save the batteries. Trisha rebuckled the pack flap before she could weaken, then wrapped her arms around it again. Now that she wasn't thirsty anymore, what should she imagine? And she knew, just like that. She imagined Tom Gordon was in the clearing with her, that he was standing right over there by the stream. Tom Gordon in his home uniform. It was so white it almost glowed in the moonlight. Not really guarding her because he was just pretend, but sort of guarding her. Why not? It was her make-believe, after all. What was that in the woods? She asked him. Don't know, Tom replied. He sounded indifferent. Of course he could afford to sound indifferent, couldn't he? The real Tom Gordon was 200 miles away in Boston, and by now probably asleep behind a locked door. How do you do it? She asked, sleepy again now. So sleepy she wasn't aware that she was speaking out loud. What's the secret? Secret of what? Of closing, Trisha said, her eyes closing. She thought he would say believing in God. Didn't he point to the sky every time he was successful, after all? Or believing in himself, or maybe trying your best. That was the motto of Trisha's soccer coach. Try your best, forget the rest. But number 36 said none of those things as he stood by the little stream. You have to try to get ahead of the first hitter, was what he said. You have to challenge him with that first pitch. Throw a strike he can't hit. He comes to the plate thinking, I'm better than this guy. You have to take that idea away from him, and it's best not to wait. It's best to do it right away. Establishing that it's you who's better, that's the secret of closing. What do you... like to throw in the first pitch was the rest of the question she meant to ask, but before she could get all of it out, she was asleep. In Castleview, her parents were also asleep, this time in the same narrow bed following a bout of sudden, satisfying, and totally unplanned sex. "If you had ever told me," was Cole's last waking thought. "I never in a million years would have," was Larry's. Of the entire family, it was Pete McFarland who slept the most uneasily in the small hours of that late spring morning. He was in the room adjoining his parents', groaning and pulling the bedclothes into a tangle as he turned restlessly from side to side. In his dreams, he and his mother were arguing, walking down the trail and arguing, and at some point he turned around in disgust, or perhaps so she wouldn't have the satisfaction of seeing that he had begun to cry a little, and Trisha was gone. At this point his dream stuttered. It caught in his mind like a bone in a throat. He twisted back and forth in his bed, trying to dislodge it. The lightening moon peered in at him, making the sweat on his forehead and temples gleam. He turned and she was gone. Turned and she was gone. Turned and she was gone. There was only the empty path. "No," Pete muttered in his sleep, shaking his head from side to side, trying to unstick the dream, to cough it loose before it choked him. He could not. He turned and she was gone. Behind him there was only the empty path. It was as if he had never had a sister at all. That was the end of that chapter. I still have footage left, so I'm going to go ahead and start the next chapter. 5th inning. When Trisha woke the next morning, her neck hurt so badly she could hardly turn her head. But she didn't care. The sun was up, filling the crescent-shaped clearing with early daylight. That was what she cared about. She felt reborn. She remembered waking in the night, being itchy and needing to urinate. She remembered going to the stream and putting mud on her stings and bites by moonlight. She remembered going to sleep while Tom Gordon was standing watch and explaining some of the secrets of his closer's role to her. She also remembered being terribly frightened of something in the woods, but of course nothing had been there watching. It was being alone in the dark that had frightened her. That was all. Something deep in her mind tried to protest this, but Trisha wouldn't let it. The night was over. She wanted to look back on it no more than she wanted to go back to that rocky slope and repeat her roll down to the tree with the wasp's nest in it. It was daytime now. There would be search parties galore, and she would be saved. She knew it. She deserved to be saved, after spending all night alone in the woods. She crawled out from under the tree, pushing her pack before her, got to her feet, put on her hat, and hobbled back to the stream. She washed the mud from her face and hands, looked at the cloud of minges and no-see-ums already reforming around her head, and reluctantly smeared on a fresh coat of goo. As she did it, she remembered one of the times she and Pepsi had played beauty parlor when they were little girls. They'd made such a mess of Mrs. Robichaud's makeup that Pepsi's mom had actually screamed at them to get out of the house. Not to bother washing up or trying to clean up, but just to get out, before she totally lost it and swatted them cross-eyed. So out they had gone, all powder and rouge and eyeliner and green eyeshadow and passion plum lipstick, probably looking like the world's youngest stripteasers. They had gone to Trisha's house, where Quilla had first gaped, then laughed until tears rolled down her face. She had taken each little girl by the hand and led them into the bathroom, where she had given them cold cream for cleaning up. "Spread upward gently, girls," Trisha murmured now. When her face was done, she rinsed her hands in the stream, ate the rest of her tuna sandwich, then half of the celery sticks. She rolled the lunch bag up with a distinct feeling of unease. Now the egg was gone, the tuna fish sandwich was gone, the chips were gone, and the Twinkies were gone. Her supplies were down to half a bottle of Surge, less, really, half a bottle of water, and a few celery sticks. "Doesn't matter," she said, tucking the empty lunch bag and the remaining celery sticks back in her pack. To this she added the tattered, dirty poncho. Doesn't matter because there's going to be search parties galore throughout the store. One will find me. I'll be having lunch in some diner by noon. Hamburger, fries, chocolate milk, apple pie a la mode. Her stomach rumbled at the thought. Once Trisha had her things packed away, she coated her hands with mud as well. The sun had found its way into the clearing now. The day was bright with the promise of heat, and she was moving a little more easily. She stretched, jogged in place a little to get the old blood moving, and rolled her head from side to side until the worst of the stiffness in her neck was gone. She paused a moment longer, listening for voices, for dogs, possibly for the irregular whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter blades. There was nothing except for the woodpecker, already hammering for his daily bread. It's all right. There's plenty of time. It's June, you know. These are the longest days of the year. Follow the stream. Even if the search parties don't find you right away, the stream will take you to people. But as the morning wore on toward noon, the stream took her only to woods and more woods. The temperature rose. Little trickles of sweat began to cut lines through her mud pack. Bigger patches formed dark circles around the armpits of her 36 Gordon shirt. Another, this one in a tree shape, began to grow between her shoulder blades. Her hair, now so muddy it looked dirty brunette instead of blonde, hung around her face. Trisha's feelings of hope began to dissipate, and the energy with which she had set out from the clearing at 7 o'clock was gone by 10. Around 11, something happened to darken her spirits even further. She had reached the top of a slope. This one was fairly gentle, at least, and strewn with leaves and needles, and stopped to have a little rest, when that unwelcome sense of awareness, the one which had nothing at all to do with her conscious mind, brought her on alert again. She was being watched. There was no use telling herself it wasn't true, because it was. Trisha turned slowly in a circle. She saw nothing, but the woods seemed to have hushed again. No more chipmunks bumbling and thrashing through the leaves and underbrush. No more squirrels on the far side of the stream. No more scolding jays. The woodpecker still hammered. The distant crows still cawed. But otherwise, there was just her and the humming mosquitoes. "Who's there?" she called. There was no answer, of course, and Trisha started down the slope next to the stream, holding on to bushes because the going was slippery underfoot. Just my imagination, she thought, but she was pretty sure it wasn't. The stream was getting narrower, and that was most certainly not her imagination. As she followed it down the long, piney slope, and then through a difficult patch of deciduous trees, too much underbrush and too much of it thorny, it shrank steadily until it was a rill only 18 inches or so across. It disappeared into a thick clump of bushes. Trisha bowled her way through the close growth beside the stream instead of going around, because she was afraid of losing it. Part of her knew that losing it would make no difference, because it was almost certainly going nowhere she wanted to go, and it was probably going nowhere at all, in fact, but those things seemed to make no difference. The truth was she had formed an emotional attachment to the stream, had bonded with it, her mother would have said, and couldn't bear to leave it. Without it, she would just be a kid wandering around in the deep woods with no plan. The very thought caused her throat to tighten and her heart to speed up.